To get our first taste of APIs, we're going to be working with OpenWeatherMap, and we're going to use its API to get the weather rather than scraping it from a website as we did before. So as a quick reminder, previously we used weatherforecast.com, and we noted that if you search for a particular location, then it puts that location in the URL, and then we loaded that URL using file getContents in PHP, and we extracted the weather forecast from that HTML page. But we said at the time that that wasn't an ideal thing to do, partly because we might get banned from doing that by the owners of weatherforecast.com if we use their servers too much, and also because we're vulnerable to weatherforecast.com changing their HTML structure, which would then break our code and our web app wouldn't work anymore. So a much better way to do it is to use an API. Let's have a quick look and see how the OpenWeatherMap API works. So on openweathermap.org, I'm going to click API. And you can see they've got a number of different API functions. You can get the current weather, 5-day forecast, 16-day forecast, etc. We're going for the current weather at the moment, so I'm going to click API doc. And you're welcome to read this in a bit more detail if you want to know more about what's going on here. But essentially, all we need to do is to get a particular URL, like this one. So api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5 weather, and then we've got a query string. Remember, question mark and then Q is equal to, and then our location. So if I just open that up in a new tab, let's see what that URL actually looks like. All right, this is it. So it's not particularly friendly looking, but this is in a format that the PHP script that we're going to use will be able to process. It's actually a format called JSON, short for JavaScript Object Notation, but it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with JavaScript, and we're going to use it in PHP here. So all we're going to do is grab the contents of this URL using file getContents, process the JSON, and then extract the bits of the weather forecast that we want and display them to the user just as before. All right. You may have noticed that we need to sign up for an API key. So I'm going to do that. Like most APIs, this has a pretty big free tier, so you can practice and mess around with it, but you need to start paying if you have a large number of users requesting data, which is fair enough. So let's get our free API key. So I'm going to be Rob Percival, rob@robpercival.co.uk. I'll put my password in here. Agree to the terms of service, and then create account. Brilliant. So now I'm all set up, and the key thing that I need, in more ways than one, is the API key here. And I'm going to replace then the URL. You notice that the URL had a default API key. So instead of using that, I'm going to use my own one. You should use your own one. And we've got the same results that we did before. Notice it can take a couple of minutes for your API key to start working. All right, so now we've got our API data. Let's jump over to FireFTP, and I'm going to create a new section. So I'm going to create directory, and this is going to be 8-APIs. So we'll go into that folder, and then I've actually got the PHP section from the course here, and the file that I need is 7.13.php. That was the What's the Weather app, and I'm going to grab the background image as well, so it still looks nice. You can get those either from your own version of the What's the Weather app, or just go back to the lecture and click on the link to download the code. All right, now I'm just going to rename that index.php, and then we should be able to jump to Chrome and find our new page. So this is going to be completewebdevelopercourse.com/content/8APIs/ and we should see the What's the Weather app. There we go. Wonderful. And let's just check that it still works. Put Tokyo in there. It does indeed. Wonderful. So that's great. Let's now open up using Command O or Control O index.php in our text editor. So I'm going to get rid of everything that we don't need here. So I'm just going to take us right down to if there is a city variable in the get string. And for now, what we'll do is we'll just load the data that we need. So I've just copied the URL there. So there it is, and we want file get contents, and we want to get the contents of that URL, but we want to replace the city with the city that the user has entered. There we go. And we want to leave our app ID in there. And for now, actually, we'll just echo that. So we'll display the results just to make sure that we've got some. There we go. Wonderful. So we need to then process this data so we can extract what we need. So I'm going to call this URL contents. And then remember, this is in a JSON format at the moment, and we want to get it into an array so we can extract the data. Fortunately, we've got a built-in function to process JSON in PHP, and that is JSON_decode. Does what it says on the tin, decodes JSON content. So we'll take URL contents and we'll convert that into an array, which I'll call weather array. And then we're just going to add a flag here, true, which will return the data in the form of an associative array, which we can then extract the data that we need from. So let's have a look at the contents of weather array. There we go. So you can see we've got the same data. I'm just going to right click and view page source so that we can see it a bit more clearly. All right, so this is all the data, and we can then access the main description. Oh, it's now changed to overcast clouds. And we've got things like temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, all the information we could possibly want. And we just need to extract this and put it into a format that we can use to give to the user. So I'm going to start off with this weather description here. Be useful to know exactly what sort of things might appear here. So I'm just going to jump quickly back to openweathermap.org/API and take a look at the API doc again for the current weather data. And you can see there's a huge amount of information about how we can get information by zip code, by city ID, etc. Even cities within a particular area. But what I'm particularly interested in now are the parameters and what values they give us. So you can see we've got coord at the top, which we've got up here, which is of course just the longitude and latitude of the location. And then in the weather mini array, we've got weather condition ID, which we're not going to pay much attention to. And then we've got weather parameters. And this one that I've been looking at is the weather condition within the group. So I'm going to start with that one. And what we'll do is we'll start off with our weather. And we'll say the weather in, and then we'll display the city that they've requested. Is currently, and then we're going to access this variable here, the description variable, using weather array. And then we want to get the weather sub array within that. So weather, and then we want to get the 0 array within that, and then we want to get the description value within that. So that should get the contents there. And let's pop a full stop and a space at the end as well. Okay, so let's have a look, see if that's worked. There we go. Fantastic. So the weather in, we haven't got our, it's because I put Tokyo for some reason rather than city. And that's given me a notice as well, which is fair enough. All right, let's just add a little bit more information. So it'd be good to get the temperature. So the temperature is currently 281 somethings. Let's have a look at the API documentation to find out what those are. So this is in Kelvin. So let's convert from Kelvin to Celsius. Let's find out how we do that. So if we scroll down, we've got a nice question there. How do you convert Kelvin to Celsius? Here we go. So it looks like we can just subtract 273. That'll give us a nice whole number. So let's get the temperature in Celsius. And so we're going to get the temperature in Kelvin. That's going to be weather array. And this time we're going to access the main subarray. And the temperature within that. And we want to subtract 273 from that. Then let's append to our weather text the temperature is, and then temp in Celsius. And I want to put degrees C there, so we're going to have to put the degree symbol in. I suspect we'll need an HTML character code for that. So let's work out what it is. Just click on that first list. And I'm going to use Command F or Control F on Windows and search for degree. And there we go. I could possibly have guessed that. So it's ampersand, deg, and then semicolon. And we'll have a C as well for degree C. All right, let's close that down and take a look, see if that's worked for us. So the temperature is 7.763 degrees C, pretty accurate. I'll just change that to a capital C. Mini challenge for you there. Can you convert that to a whole number? Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. I'm just going to do a quick search. PHP convert to whole number. Get the integer value of a variable. That looks good. So we've got a PHP function, int val. That looks like it'll do what we want. So int val and then our number. Wonderful. So let's put that here. There we go. And now we should find that we've got a whole number value. Fantastic. I'm just going to take one more bit of information and I'll take the wind speed. So let's just check to see what that's measured in. So the wind speed is in meters per second. That's fine. I'll leave it as meters per second. You can work out how to convert it to miles per hour if you like. It's not that tricky. And we can actually put it just straight in here. So the wind speed is, and we're going to get that from the wind subarray and then speed. So that's weather array, wind, and then speed. And let's pop a full stop on the end there. All right, so let's take a look. Wonderful. So you can obviously customize that to contain the exact weather that you want to show to the user, which is another advantage of doing it this way. But really the big advantage is that we're doing it legally, as it were. We're doing it as the system intended. And so our web app is not going to break down simple change of HTML of website that we don't control. All right, so just two little challenges for you to finish this one off. Firstly, can you get the web app to behave nicely if the user enters something which is not a valid city name? Go for it. All right, hope you managed that. So I'm just going to put in some random text and let's submit that. Okay, and we get all sorts of errors, notices, and a bit of gobbledygook there as well. So let's have a look and see what the weather array looks like when we try and search for an invalid city. So there we go. We've got a code of 404 and an error message as well. So we could search for that particular code, but it might be worth just checking again a valid city. And here we can see that there's a code here of 200. So it looks to me like 200 is a valid code and anything else will not be valid. So let's do a check here to see if the weather array cod or code variable is equal to 200. Don't forget your double equals. Then we'll do all of that. If it's not, then we'll display an error message. So something like, could not find city, please try again. And that just covers us more generally rather than that specific 404 error. We're now going to get a nice error message even if there's a different sort of error. And don't forget the semicolon there, and let's then give it a go. So it's still working nicely for Paris, and if I put in some nonsense, we get a nice error message, could not find that city. Alright, so we're almost there. The last mini challenge for you is to make the weather web app play nicely with cities with spaces in their names. So things like San Francisco or New York. Go for it. Okay, hope you managed it. Let's start off by seeing what happens if we search for a city with a place name in at the moment. We get a nasty error. So we're going to need to do something about that. What we did before was we just removed the space and just sent it through as San Francisco without a space. And notice that does actually work fine. If I put in San Francisco without a space, that does give me the correct weather for San Francisco. Well, I've just noticed actually we don't have units on the wind speed. So let's pop those in. That's better. But I'm going to show you another way of doing it, which is a little bit more powerful, and that's using a command called URL encode, which if you've done a bit of Googling you might have come across, but don't worry if you hadn't. So URL encode essentially converts all of the nasty characters like question marks, equal signs, spaces, apostrophes into character codes so that they can be put into a URL without causing any problems. So let's just do that right here. So we just have to URL encode the city name, and now if we put in San Francisco with a space, we submit and we get the weather there. So that's just another solution. If you did it by removing the space, then that's a good solution too. So let's just take out our code there. And there we go. So we've recreated the What's the Weather app in a much more powerful and safer way. We can be much more confident that this app is not going to break if a website that we don't control decides to change its HTML. And we're doing it within the web rules as well, and we're using the API exactly as it was intended. So that was an introduction to APIs. We're now going to step it up a little and use a rather more complex API, the Google Maps API.